Ahoy, everyone, and welcome to another live stream. And with me today, I've got my good friend, brother in Christ, Bob of Speaker's Corner. How you doing, Bob?
I am well, thank you. I did just eat a huge brunch just before coming on to this live, so I'm feeling I'm feeling like I need to lie down.
I know the feeling. Trust me. The food is part of my indulgences that I unfortunately delve too much into it. But anyway, so we've got a very exciting stream today. Bob, tell us what we're going to be dealing with today.
So we're going to be looking at a massive internal contradiction within Islam, like a collapse of internal coherence. And I'm going to be expressing why that is and what it's rooted in. So this is just a pure explanation as to just another reason why Islam is false, to add to the many other reasons that many other people have pointed out. So yeah, that's what we'll be looking at.
Great stuff. Well, it's good to see you guys in the chat already. Good to see Doki, and Stacy. If you guys haven't, please do like the stream, share it out with as many people as you can, get some more people in here. Trying to get past that magical 3,000-hour watch time thing, so we can get some cash flowing into the ministry to get some more books and to do up the backgrounds and things like that. So that would be really good.
I've just got to say, it is very nice to be back in Unimatrix 1.
Ah, yeah, that was Chestnut. Yeah. You said that before. It's like Zorg, and yeah, that's what. Anyway, yeah. So, well, I think without further ado, I think we'll dive in. So, have you got anything to share in terms of the presentation, or is it just
nothing to share on your screen? It'll just be me talking, and you feel free, of course, to jump in at your leisure. So we're going to start off by looking at a verse in the Qur'an, which is Surah 5, Ayah 3, which reads as follows: "Forbidden to you are carrion, blood, and swine, and what is slaughtered in the name of any other than Allah, or what is killed by strangling, beating, a fall, or being gored to death, what is partly eaten by a predator, unless you slaughter it, and what is sacrificed on altars. You're also forbidden to draw lots for decisions, and this is all evil. Today the disbelievers have given up all hope of undermining your faith. So do not fear them, fear me. Today I have perfected your faith for you, completed my favor upon you, and chosen Islam as your way. But whoever is compelled by extreme hunger, not intending to sin, then surely Allah is all forgiving, the most merciful." Now, the point of our discussion today is going to focus on this outlandish statement by Allah, which is, "Today I have perfected your faith for you, completed my favor upon you, and chosen Islam as your way." Because when someone says that something is perfected, what does that mean to you, Sam? What do you understand from "today I've perfected this piece of art," or "today I've perfected my writing style," or "today I've perfected my dance step"? What how would you understand that, such a claim?
I think it would be without blemish, that there's no errors, no flaws, to be made whole, potentially as well could be another one.
No deficiencies?
Yeah, no deficiencies.
Anything else?
To be altogether without contradiction.
Yeah. Without need of addition or subtraction?
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd say so, yeah.
Yeah. And I just want to read some of what the commentators or the tafsir of Muslim scholars have said about this particular passage, just to help to try and frame it. But I agree with the general sense. If someone claims that something is perfect, if they're saying that something is perfected, then that means that it needs neither addition nor subtraction, that it is flawless, that it is without errors or mistakes, that it is comprehensive, that it is full to the fullest extent of the word full can mean. Abbas, in his Tanwir al-Mikbas min Tasfir of Ibn Abbas, he said this, quoting the verse from the Quran, "This day," is a reference to the day of pilgrimage. "Have I perfected your religion for you?" is I have elucidated to you the prescriptions of your religion, the lawful and the unlawful, the commands and the prohibitions, and completed my favor unto you means I have completed my blessings upon you, in that after today no idolater will ever gather with you in Arafat Mina, in the circumambulation around the Kaaba, and in the coming and the going between Al-Safa and Al-Marwa. Jalal, in his Al-Jalalain, wrote this on this passage: "Today I have perfected your religion for you," that is, its rulings and obligations. After this verse, nothing about what is lawful or unlawful was revealed. "And I have completed my favor upon you by perfecting it, your religion. But it is also said, by effecting their safe entry into Mecca, and I have approved or chosen Islam for you as religion." Ibn Kathir, we all love a bit of Ibn Kathir, said this: "This day I have perfected your religion for you, completed my favor upon you, and have chosen for you Islam as your religion," means this indeed is the biggest favor from Allah to this ummah, for he has completed their religion for them, and they thus do not need any other religion or any other prophet except Muhammad. This is why Allah made Muhammad the final prophet and sent him to all humans and jinn. Therefore, the permissible is what he allows, the impermissible is what he prohibits. The law is what he legislates, and everything that he conveys is true and authentic and does not contain lies or contradictions. This meaning is to accept Islam for yourselves, for it is the religion that Allah likes and which he chose for you, and it is that which he sent the best of the honorable messages and most glorious of his books. And then, let me just, sorry, my computer is fighting me. There we go. So just give one more. Maududi, in Sayyid Abdul Allah Maududi Tafhim al-Quran, says this: "I have perfected your religion," means I have provided it with all the essential elements of a permanent way of life which compromises a complete system of thought and practice and civilization, and have laid down principles and given detailed instructions for the solution of all human problems. Hence, there is no need for you to seek guidance and instruction from any other source. The completion of the blessing is the completion of the blessing of guidance. I have proved Islam for you as a way of life for you, because you have practically proved by your obedience and devotion to it that you sincerely believe in Islam, which you have accepted, as I have practically set you free from every kind of subjugation and servitude. There is no compulsion for you to submit to any other than me in practical life. It also implies, as a gratitude for these blessings of mine, you should show no negligence in the observance of the prescribed limits. Authentic traditions show that this declaration was revealed on the occasion of the last Hajj performed by the Holy Prophet in AH 10. I am, however, of the opinion that this was at first revealed in AH 6, after Hijrah 6, close after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, as part of this discourse, but was again sent down to the Holy Prophet for this declaration on that suitable occasion. This is because this verse is so well knit in this context that it would be incomplete without it. Therefore, it cannot be imagined that it was inserted here afterwards when it was revealed in after Hijrah 10. I believe and the real knowledge is with Allah, that at this time of its revelation, in this context, it reveals significance. Its real significance was not realized. Therefore, in AH 10, when the whole of the Arabia was subdued and the power of Islam reached its zenith, Allah again sent down these sentences to his prophet for their declaration on the occasion of his last Hajj. Now, what do you get from those commentaries, bro?
It's fairly consistent across the board. That it's basically what we were stating. That
Go on.
Yeah, universal. It's a universal sort of exclamation of the fact that this basically says what it is what it says on the tin.
Yeah, that the boundaries of the religion have been laid out, and you don't need to go further than them. You don't need to add to them. You don't need to take away from them. You just need to adhere to them. And that, Allah has made Muhammad the supreme ruler of the Arabian Peninsula, that he now possesses Mecca and he controls it. But this idea, and so because he now controls it, it's kind of like, everything that is needed now for Islam to be Islam is in place. It's perfected. And all the laws of haram and halal are there, established at the time of Muhammad. That's what I get from it, and it sounds like you're getting the same thing. Now, the problem with this, and this is where we get to internal inconsistency, is that when we actually look into Islamic history, we realize that there's actually been huge developments within Islam from the time of Muhammad, and that these developments that are post-Muhammad are eventually crystallized into the Islam that we know. In other words, what I'm saying to you is that the Islam that we know is not the Islam that Muhammad and his companions experienced. The Islam that we know developed afterwards. Now, what's the problem with, say, if that thesis is true, and I'm going to try and demonstrate it shortly, but what's the problem with this idea that the Islam that we know has developed post-Muhammad?
Because it contradicts that statement that you don't need to add or subtract. You don't need anything else. Everything has already been laid out. Everything, the path has been laid.
Yeah. If Islam was perfected on the day that this ayah was revealed, then you don't need to add anything else to it. I mean, how can you add to perfection? How can you improve of that which is perfect? And if it is clear guidance without doubt, there should be no disagreement about what is halal and what is haram, because it has been perfected and laid out. You just need to adhere to it. Now, the very fact of the verse itself draws in some questions, because lots of Muslims don't believe that verse is the last revealed verse of the Qur'an. Now, if it's not the last revealed verse of the Quran, and other verses of the Quran were revealed, and bearing in mind that the last of the Tasfir commentators actually gave 2 dates. He said that the verse was revealed twice, once in 10 after Hijrah and once in 6 after Hijrah, And so if it was revealed twice, then that means the first time it was revealed, assuming that he's correct, there was still more Quran to be revealed. The problem is Islam is not complete without the Quran. Like, a full Quran has to be present for Islam to be complete. Yeah. Now, we already know from the hadiths that there are hadiths missing, but it may interest people to just think about the fact that the Quran itself was compiled after Muhammad. I'm going to read from Sahih al-Bukhari, the Book of Virtues of the Quran, Hadith 4986. And it reads this. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq said, "For me, after the heavy casualties among the warriors of the Battle of Yamama, where the great number of the Qur'an were killed, Umar was present with Abu Bakr who said, Umar has come to me and said, casualties were heavy among the Qur'an of the Qur'an on the day of the Battle of Yamama, and I am afraid that more heavy casualties may take place among the Qur'an on other battlefields, whereby a large part of the Quran may be lost. Now, just bear in mind that in the same hadiths, it mentions that some verses of the Quran were only found with one person. So that opens up the possibility that some parts of the Quran were already lost. But we'll just put that out there, and we'll carry on with the main thesis. The hadith continues. Therefore, I suggest that you, Abu Bakr, order that the Quran was collected, the Quran to be collected. So here you've got Zayd bin Ibn Thabit saying that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq has sent for him and told him this news, and then he has suggested, Zayd bin Thabit has suggested that Abu Bakr order the Quran to be collected, which begs the question, why didn't Muhammad do this? And if Muhammad had done it, why didn't they just go and get that one? So this is obviously talking about a development. The Quran itself, a compiled Quran, is a development, a reactionary development to the Battle of Yamama. Abu Bakr added, I said to Umar, how can I do something which Allah's apostle has not done? Umar said, by Allah, it is something beneficial. Umar kept on pressing for me for that till Allah opened my chest. For that, I began to realize the good in the idea which Umar had realized. So in other words, the idea of compiling the Quran doesn't come from Muhammad. It comes from the companions, and it comes after the death of Muhammad. And so this is a development within Islam. It is improving, because would you not agree, bro, that a compiled Quran is better than a scattered Quran? You're on mute.
Yes, because you get the whole picture.
Exactly. So this is an improvement upon perfection. Allah left something perfect. Allah had perfected something with Muhammad, but the companions of Allah have improved upon it, because a compiled Quran is better than a dispersed Quran. A written Quran is better than a Quran that is just memorized. And so perfection is being improved upon. Now, you can also find another interesting hadith of the same in Sahih al-Bukhari, Book of Virtues 4987. And I just want to put out a proviso there, just to point out that different hadith collections use different numbering systems. They haven't yet come to a universalized numbering system. And so I might give one reference, but you might not find it there because they use different referencing referencing systems. Now, moving on. Now, I'm sure, bro, do you know about the reason why Islam is split between Sunni and Shia?
Yes, to do with the hadiths.
No. Well, first tell me what you say about the hadiths, and then I'll either agree or disagree.
Well, I mean, I think there's Sunni and Shia. What I can't remember which one is which, but one will adhere to Quran only, and the other will adhere to the Quran and the hadiths, as long as the hadith is in like high esteem. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, but it's wrong.
Okay, correct.
So the reason why Islam is split is because when Muhammad dies in 632, he didn't leave a clear, explicit way to understand how his succession, or if he was to be succeeded in any way, was to go forward. And so upon his death, Muslims then ended up with very different opinions about how things should go forward. So, for example, the Sunnis held that the Prophet didn't appoint any specific successor, that he kind of just left it to the Ummah to decide. And a Saqifa meeting, or a council meeting after the Prophet's death, prominent companions like Abu Bakr, Umar ibn al-Khattab, and others at this Saqifa meeting chose a leader, and they chose Abu Bakr as the first elected caliph amongst the companions of the Prophet. And they did it because of his sort of leadership skills. And they'll make arguments for this based on, words in Sahih al-Bukhari, like the leaders, imams, are from the Quraysh. And they're interpreted as a general guideline for leadership, but not a specific appointment. And Abu Bakr's precedence in leading prayers during the Prophet's, time of final illness is seen as a kind of an implicit endorsement of his right to become the successor. Now, Abu Bakr had seniority in his role in accompanying the Prophet during the Hijrah to Medina, and there was also familiarity with tribal links and tribal dynamics, which was crucial for uniting the nascent Muslim state. The Shia, by contrast, argue that Muhammad explicitly designated his own cousin and son-in-law, Ali ibn Abi Talib, as the successor at various different points during his lifetime. They cite one particular episode at Ghadir Qum, where the Prophet reportedly said, "For whoever I am, his Mawla, master, Ali is his Mawla, master." And this is viewed by the Shia as saying that Ali was meant to be the successor to Muhammad. And they'll even quote verses like Surah 567, "O Messenger, proclaim what has been revealed to you from your Lord." And they interpret that, or Shia commentators interpret that to refer to the Prophet's proclamation of Ali's leadership at Ghadir Qum. And Shia narrations emphasize the Prophet's close familial ties with Ali, Ali's unparalleled knowledge, and his role as the gate of knowledge, as per widely accepted hadith, which says, "I am the city of knowledge, and Ali is its gate," that being Muhammad reportedly speaking. And they also back this argument up by citing the fact that Ali was one of the first converts to Islam, about his steadfastness, about his courage in battle for the Muslim community, and also his marriage to Fatima, the Prophet's daughter, which symbolized a familial continuation of the prophetic legacy. Now, all of this goes to show that Muslims have a big problem, which is that on this day, I have perfected your religion for you. I've chosen you the religion of Islam. And this perfected religion is meant to be a nascent state. It's meant to be a way of governing society. And yet there's no clear means of succession. There wasn't a clear mechanism of succession laid out. And this actually caused the very split. Now, how long was it? How long would you say it was before the church split?
Sorry, say that again.
How long would you say it was before you would say the church split after Christ?
After Christ. First of all, there was the Oriental Orthodox splitting off, and then the famous schism of 1054. It wasn't really at 1054. It's sort of gradual splitting off. But if we say 1054 generally, about over 1,000 years.
Yeah, so you've got the big European split in 1054, and then you've got the split at Chalcedon, which is a 5th century split between the African Christians or rather the Egyptian Coptic Church and the European Church. And then you've got an earlier split before that, before the Council of Nicaea, with the Church in the East, which was under the Persian Empire. And they split not actually for any doctrinal reasons, but just for socio-political and economic reasons, because they were in the Persian Empire, and the Persian Empire was then fighting the Roman Empire, and they were Persians. They were by blood Persians rather than Romans or Greeks, and so they split. But either way, it was centuries after Jesus, and very clearly the act of men. And the split occurs because of the failures of men to be unimaginative, and to be uncommunicative, and to be to lack compassion and be willing to show patience in trying to understand the other. Whereas this split within Islam occurs directly out of the fault of Muhammad's own teaching, or rather the fault of Muhammad's lack of teaching, because he'd basically created a cult around him. He didn't care what happened after he died. He'd got what he'd wanted out of it. And so, he never clearly said how he was going to be succeeded. Could you think why perhaps a cult built around Muhammad's own benefit, it might have been important and advantageous for him not to make clear a successor?
Not off the top of my head, no. I can't.
Well, whoever he chooses, he's going to upset someone.
Yeah, that's true.
Whoever he chooses, he's going to lose. And this is a sure sign of the failures of his own teaching, that his community, he sacrificed his community for his own short-term gains. Now, so succession develops after Muhammad, or the ideas of succession develop after Muhammad, and surely ideas of succession fall into categories of the boundaries of religion. But it doesn't stop there. There's more examples. So you've got the first fitna, the first civil war amongst the Muslims. And this became pronounced after the assassination of the third caliph, Uthman ibn Affan, in 656. So Ali became the fourth caliph, but faced opposition from prominent figures like Aisha and Talha Zubair, and later Muawiyah and the governor of Syria. And you can well imagine why Aisha might have some rivalry with Fatima, given that both of them had precedence in their closeness to Muhammad, one being his daughter, one being his wife, young enough to be his daughter. And how that then leads them into choosing different sides. And so you ended up with a civil war precisely because of this difference. And this leads to a whole series of different beliefs emerging between the Sunni and the Shia that have, for 1400 years, because of the fact that Islam doesn't teach about reconciliation and forgiveness in the same way that Christianity does, that you end up with a 1400 years of bloodshed between the two groups. Now, we today understand that zakat is part of the Islam's teaching. I mean, it's one of the 5 pillars. Everybody accepts that today. But the truth is that actually develops historically within Islamic history. It's not clear within Islamic history that zakat was one of the 5 pillars of Islam. So you have, immediately after Muhammad's death, you have what's known as the Ridda Wars. So we're moving on to another example of development. And the Ridda Wars, or known in Muslim circles as the Wars of Apostasy, touch upon a very deeply theological / political and economic point, which is zakat. Is zakat a part of Islam, or is it something else? Now, today we understand that zakat is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. And it's about purifying wealth and helping the less fortunate Muslim, not just anyone, the Muslim. And you find it in Surah 9, Ayah 60 of the Qur'an, where it says, zakat's expenditure are only for the poor and the needy, Muslim, and for those employed to collect it, and for bringing hearts together, and for freeing captives, and for those in debt, and for the cause of Allah, and for the stranded traveler, which through fiqh, Muslims say you can only give it to Muslims. So it's not charity, it's a redistributive tax that was applied during the time of Muhammad, and that's undisputable, right? Because Muhammad was the leader of the Muslim community, and he was the one that was organizing this zakat. Okay. Now, what happened is that after Muhammad died, several tribes who had always understood zakat as a covenant between themselves and Muhammad specifically did not feel obliged to then continue to pay that zakat after Muhammad died. And they interpreted zakat as a pledge of political allegiance, to Muhammad, rather than as a religious duty that they have to carry out like prayer. And so they refused to pay zakat. Tribes such as the Banu Hanifa and others refused to pay zakat to Abu Bakr's caliphate. They had argued that their loyalty was to Muhammad, and that his successors had no claim over their wealth. And so they basically said, we're Muslim, we're doing what Muhammad told us to do, but now he's dead. Our offerings of him, our pledge of allegiance to him in monetary terms, doesn't need to continue to you, Abu Bakr. Now, Abu Bakr, on the contrary, argues that Abu Bakr said, by Allah, if they withhold from me even a she kid or a young goat they used to pay the messenger of Allah, I will fight them for withholding it. And that's in Sahih al-Bukhari, hadith number 6924. And so what we're seeing within Islam is that actually it's this event that stamps zakat as one of the pillars of Islam. It's this war that stamps zakat undisputably as one of the 5 pillars of Islam. Because if the other tribes had won, Islam could have looked very different. But Abu Bakr wins this war, and he equates it, not paying the zakat, to apostasy. And so it's Abu Bakr that is now deciding what is halal and what is haram. And it's Abu Bakr who is deciding how we understand Muhammad's teaching. It's not Muhammad. Because other Muslims have disagreed with Abu Bakr. So it wasn't clearly, because if it was clear, why are they arguing? Now, the wars of apostasy are fought only very shortly. It's just a year-long war. It's a very lightning sort of military campaign led by Abu Bakr. And it ends up consolidating the Muslim community under his rule. And the Banu Hanifa and the Musaylima. So Musaylima was the leader of the Banu Hanifa. And at that time, he claims prophethood himself. And this results in the Battle of Yamama that we've just mentioned. And so this Battle of Yamama actually becomes a sort of touch point upon the development of Islam. And you get these other groups like those led by Aswad al-Ansi in Yemen who claimed to be a prophet, and the tribes in Bahrain and Oman who also refused to pay zakat and tried to declare their independence. You know, they were allied to Muhammad because of religious reasons, but they didn't see that as continuing after the Prophet died to, you know, the next local Muslim leader of those people over there, as it were. And so this Battle of Yamama not only affects the development of the Quran, but it also affects the development and is directly connected to the development of Muslim understanding of the 5 pillars of Islam, which were not clear at the time of Muhammad's death. And it also fuses this idea, these wars fuse the idea that the Islamic world should be ruled by a single caliph from the time of Muhammad's death onwards. Again, something that is not actually clear according to the historical sources. You know, if people want to read further onto that, into this issue, I'd recommend that they read Ibn Ishaq's Sirah and also Al-Tabari's History, or Tariq al-Tabari. And you can also find references to this in Sahih al-Bukhari. And so this results in political consolidation. It results in the preservation of zakat as one of the 5 pillars of Islam, and it results in the development of the Quran as a compiled text. And this is all happening after the time of the Prophet. This is all happening after the time of Muhammad. You following me so far, bro?
Yep.
Now, when someone says Sharia to you, what do you think?
Brings up stuff of nightmares. Sharia is it's Islamic law. It's strict Islamic law, forbidding gambling, smoking, etc.
Yeah. Where do you think it comes from?
Does it come from the Hadiths?
Nope.
Oh,
so Sharia law, Muslim salesmen, the Dawagandists, they'll go up to people and they'll say that Sharia law is divine law, that it comes from God, rather than your man-made law, right? They like to make this boast. But what they don't tell anyone is that what they understand as Sharia law comes from a practice called fiqh or fiqh. Not quite sure about the pronunciation. I've not heard too many Arabs say it. And fiqh or fiqh is this idea of a Muslim scholar following a certain methodology, looking at the hadiths and looking at the Quran, creates Sharia law. They mold Sharia law out of their interpretation of the hadiths and the Quran. Now, obviously, that begs the question: who gets to have that authority? And obviously, this is why you've got as many Islams as you've got scholarly schools of thought. You know, and Sharia law is as diverse as there are scholars. There's not a singular Sharia law, but the thing is, fiqh itself is something that developed after Muhammad. Now, this is super important because Muslims try to tell us that Muhammad brought Sharia law. But what we understand Sharia law to be comes after Muhammad. It develops after Muhammad. And the methodology and the systems by which they construct Sharia law all develop after Muhammad. You know, so when Muhammad's alive, you've got the Quran, and then you've got his actions, the things that he permits, the things that he denies, the things that he says yes to, the things that he says no to, right? And then after his death, we get a kind of a similar thing, happening with the companions. Now, in a process called ijtihad, which is the idea of independent reasoning. But this independent reasoning ends up becoming a formative influence over what is Sharia law. And I've given an example of that with Abu Bakr's decision to fight the Ridda Wars, which you can read about in Sahih al-Bukhari, number 6924. Or for example, when Umar ibn al-Khattab suspends the Hud punishments for theft during a time of famine. Now that's an example of ijtihad, the idea of independent reasoning. There's nothing in the Qur'an or the hadiths except hadiths about Umar ibn al-Khattab. There's nothing about Muhammad that tell us that you shouldn't perform the hudud punishments for theft during a time of famine. This is something that Umar ibn al-Khattab contributes to the Sharia law. So it's developing after Muhammad. What is halal and what is haram is developing after Muhammad. But yet the verse, if you remember, states, "On this day I have perfected your religion for you today." And we've all, logically, you don't add to perfection. You don't take away from perfection. You don't modulate and change something that is perfect. And something that's perfect, I think it's fair to say, should work. But we've seen that it failed to describe clearly a mechanism of succession. And we're seeing developments and additions and changes and modulations to that which Muhammad left behind. It is developing bid'ah. And so then Muslims start to come up with ways to try and legitimize these things. They start to develop ideas like qiyas, which is the idea of analogical reasoning, which is basically when an unprecedented issue arises, i.e. something that Muhammad never encountered, and then the Muslims use analogical reasoning to make a ruling on that. So an example of that would be Muhammad thought that everywhere in the world endured a night and day within a 24-hour period. But Muslims later discover that in Greenland and Antarctica, you have 6 months of darkness and you have 6 months of daylight. And in northern Norway, 6 months of darkness and 6 months of daylight. So how do you do Ramadan in those times and in those periods? And then they use things like analogical reasoning. And then they use concepts like ijma, this idea of consensus, where if apparently everybody agrees around resolving a dispute, and therefore because the community is agreed, therefore the issue is settled. And the amount of things that actually could be said to be ijma, consensus, are incredibly few in number, because pretty much the Muslims disagree about everything amongst themselves. Now, and then you get to the Umayyad period. Now, the two periods that are important in this is the Umayyad period and the Abbaside period. So the Umayyads were the caliphate that emerged out of the successors to Muhammad, the four rightly guided caliphs. And they support, in this moment, the beginnings of the codification of Islamic law, because the Muslim empire had grown exponentially. And so legal opinions were beginning to diverge geographically, particularly in like places like Medina and Iraq, because in Iraq they were using qiyas constantly, this analogical reasoning, because they were encountering things that Muhammad had never encountered. Whereas in Medina they were emphasizing sunnah because Muhammad was from Medina, or had lived in Medina most of his life. And you end up with people like Al-Hassan al-Basri, who, was talking about morality and justice, and Ibrahim al-Nakai, who's talking, who begins to influence the Hanafi school and stressing qiyas. And this begins to see a divergence of Islamic jurisprudence, which is the practice of fiqh. And then there's a rebellion. And the Umayyads are overthrown and around 750, and they're replaced by the Abbasids. And the Abbasids is where we get the classical Islam from that we think of today. This is where it comes from. Because during the Abbasid period, you get the formation of legal schools, madhabs, by the way, which have no precedent under the Prophet. That Muhammad never talks about having different legal schools, and his companions have already started adding to what Muhammad revealed, bearing in mind it's meant to be a perfected religion. But then you get these legal schools developing, like the Hanafi school by Abu Hanifa in 767, the Maliki school by Malik ibn Anas in 795, the Shafi'i school by al-Shafi in 820 AD, and the Hanbali school by Ahmad ibn Hanbal in 855 AD. And each one of these schools has a different methodology. So the Hanafi school focuses on qiyas and juridical preference, whereas the Maliki school emphasizes the practice of the people of Medina, and the Shafi school systemizes the idea of usul al-fiqh, which is the principles of jurisprudence, and start integrating the Qur'an, the Sunnah, the Ijma, the qiyas into this kind of codified methodology. The Hanbali school was preferencing a sort of textualism of the Quran and the Hadiths. It's in this same period that you get the compilation of the Hadiths. Imam Bukhari works in this period, Imam Muslim works in this period, and the great compilations of Hadiths. And so, when we engage Muslims, bro, what do they do?
Well, we're seeing a lot of flurry in the chat, so we're getting a real world representation as to what happens with Muslims. So, in terms of Muslims' behavior, I'd say it depends on who you get, because you do get some Muslims who are very genuinely very nice. You do get some that are very confrontational.
Just speaking in terms of how they try to use their sources and how they talk about Sharia law. Sorry, to be clearer on that.
Yeah. In terms of the Islamic sources and Sharia law and things like that, it's very much, in my experience anyway, from what I've seen, is very much shaped on who they're speaking to. And it seems to me that a lot of it's sugar coated, selective. It could even be, it could even be delving into the realms of taqiyya at times as well.
Okay, so I'm more going on. I'm more talking about how they talk about their sources, in the sense of they will appeal to the Quran and they'll appeal to a hadith. And then what they'll do is they'll give a ruling, and sometimes their rulings, they'll give they'll present Islam as this perfect legal code, but depending on who you talk to, they may indicate which madhab they belong to, or that they belong to no madhab if they're Salafi, and so they're appealing back to this Abbasid period. They're using Sahih al-Bukhari, they're using Sahih al-Muslim, they're using a compiled Quran, they're using these rulings of the madhabs in their interpretations of Islam, which means that their Islam is being filtered through this Abbasid period. The crystallization of what we know of Islam occurs in the Abbasid period, particularly Sunni Islam. But what you've got to remember is that crystallization should not have occurred past Muhammad's point of life. Because remember, the Quran says, on this day, I have perfected your religion for you. So the religion was already perfect at the time of Muhammad. Well, if it was already perfect at the time of Muhammad, why do you need madhabs? If it was already perfect at the time of Muhammad, why do you need collections of hadith? If it was already perfect at the time of Muhammad, why do you need a compilation of the Quran? If it was already perfect at the time of Muhammad, why does zakat end up being, fought over and then settled? Why is there not a mechanism of succession? Why all this development in something that is perfected? And so what you're seeing is a collapse of the internal coherence of the Islamic rhetoric, and much more importantly, of the Quran's own statements. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. The Quran is saying one thing, but historical analysis is contradicting the doctrine of the Quran. And the thing is, you can't argue with a historical analysis. This is Muslim history that I'm just giving you. I'm giving you Muslim history right now. I'm not doing the J thing, the Dr. J. Smith thing of questioning the whole of Islamic history. I'm just telling Islamic history from Muslim sources, but I'm not doing it as a Muslim. I'm just using their understanding of history and going, okay, let's pretend that this history is all trustworthy. And if it is, how does that actually marry up to what the Quran says doctrinally about the status of Islam at the time of Muhammad? And the two things don't line up. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So
yeah.
It's basically, so we've got Muhammad, life of Muhammad, Quran states it's perfect. And then what we actually look for when we go back and do historical criticism and like Muslims like to do towards Christianity and things like that, same sort of level of scrutiny that we do in the West for everything, is we go back through Islamic history from their own sources, from what they have and what they've given to us and what has been translated so we can read. We go through and we see that, hang on, that's been developed, that's been developed, that's been developed, that's been developed. And so this statement that's mentioned in the Quran doesn't actually translate to the reality of the situation within Islam. Correct.
Yeah. The doctrinal statements of the Quran don't measure up to the historical weighing of how religions develop. Now, there is more that I can talk about on here. I can talk about more about the development of the madhabs themselves, which are the legal schools. But I just want to give an example of where the halal and haram issue comes in, because when you challenge Muslims about this, one of the things that they tried to do is they tried to reduce this question to, when this verse is revealed, it's just talking about the food laws. That at the time of the food laws, that at this point, those have been perfected, that Muslims now know what is halal and what is haram, right? But the problem with that is any, first year student of Usul al-Fiqh will tell you, that actually Muslims don't agree even on the food laws about what is halal and what is haram. So so when it comes to eating of sea creatures, the Hanafi view is that when it says when the fish are halal because they've got scales. But creatures like lobsters and crabs and other aquatic animals are haram because they don't come under the definition of fish. And this is coming from Surah 596 of the Quran, where it says, when it talks about game from the sea, or things you catch from the sea. But the Hanafi fiqh restricts this only to fish, and that means that they're in disagreement with the Shafi school and the Maliki school, because they say that all sea animals are halal, including shellfish, right? So long as they're not harmful. And they use Surah 16:14. It is he who subjected the sea so that you may eat tender meat from it. And so depending on your fiqh, you use the Quran and the hadiths in different ways, and you end up with different Sharia laws. The Hanbali school, for instance, permits all sea creatures to be eaten. And so if this is a perfected system, if it's a perfected law, why is it self-contradictory? Why is the Hanafi and the Shafi and the Maliki and the Hanbali all disagreeing with one another? And it's because of their different methodologies. It's because of their different usul al-fiqh. And the whole usul al-fiqh developed after Muhammad. So the usul al-fiqh, the idea of this Islamic jurisprudence, develops after Muhammad, revisits the sources of Islam, and then comes up with different answers about how you practice Sharia. And another example of that would be, things that nullify wudu. You know what wudu is, right? Do you know what wudu is?
I've heard the name before. Off the top of my head, I can't remember.
It's ritual washing before prayer that makes you pure so that you can perform salat.
Yes, that's it.
So what makes wudu invalid? Well, it depends which school of Islamic jurisprudence you ask. So is touching mahram women, or non-mahram women, is touching non-mahram women something that makes your wudu invalid? Well, for Shafi, touching a non-mahram woman, a non-permissible woman, whether with or without desire, nullifies your wudu, your ablution. And they're arguing from Surah 443, which mentions, all you who touch women, and that the Shafi school interprets that quite literally. So even an accidental touch could require renewing wudu. Whereas the Hanafi school argues that it doesn't nullify your wudu unless you touch them and your touch is accompanied by a sexual desire. And that's, and so they interpret the Quranic verse with a bit more leniency, massaged into the text. It's not as literal, and it involves something of the human psychology. And so they're not interpreting it. They're interpreting it to mean in terms of sexual relations, not mere physical touch. Because I can touch a woman's shoulder because I'm trying to brush a fly off her shoulder. That doesn't mean I'm trying to touch her sexually. But I could be brushing a fly off her shoulder and touching her sexually at the same time. These are not the same kind of touch. They're different kinds of touch. And I could be lying and saying I'm brushing a fly off when actually I'm touching her sexually. Do you see my point? There's different kinds of touch. So depending on your way of interpreting the sources of Islam, you come up with different rulings. The Hanbali and the Maliki, they agree with the Hanafi position that the intention or the desire determines whether wudu is nullified. And so, this is quite important. Wudu is what Muslims need to do before they do salat. And so what makes your wudu valid or invalid is kind of a big deal. If you've got it wrong, then you are either not doing salat that's acceptable, or you are. It's not a little thing here. And yet Muslim scholars are arguing over this centuries after Muhammad died. Why? Because it was not perfected at the time of Muhammad. It's not clear at the time of Muhammad. It's not clear from the time of Muhammad what actually Islam was supposed to look like. It gets developed by these madhabs. Another example would be the consumption of alcohol-based substances. So the Hanafi view is that only intoxicating drinks derived from grapes or dates are haram, but small amounts of other fermented substances, such as vinegar, are permissible. And they're looking at Surah 590, which focuses on intoxicants. But they're quite all right with cigarettes and coffee, which also...
I was just going to say, it sort of brings up that whole thing of, like, I think I'm right in saying there's a big sort of well, I wouldn't say controversy, but depending on your school of thought and who your imam and things like that is, about stuff like mouthwash. Because obviously that has alcohol in it, whether that's acceptable or not.
Yep, exactly. And this is why you get this development of non-alcoholic versions of mouthwash. It contributes to that whole development in the economy of such things. And this is connected, and Muslims have different opinions on this. Because the Shafi, the Maliki, and the Hanbali say that any substance derived from alcohol is haram, regardless of whether it's causing an intoxication. Because even trace amounts of alcohol are impure as far as they're concerned. Here's another example, right? Remember, all of these questions of what's halal and haram, the verse that we read at the beginning says, are laid out, are clear, are perfected. It's all made clear, like we know. Well, if we know, why do the madhabs disagree? Yeah? Why did the madhabs even have to form? Which is kind of a clue that actually what the Qur'an says isn't correct. So you've got timing of the Eid prayer. So performing the Eid prayer, do you perform the Eid prayer immediately after sunrise? As preferred by the Hanafi school, or can you, when the sun is fully risen and at its highest brightness? Like, there's differences of opinion amongst the madhabs, and their reasoning is different. The Hanafi are saying that to have delayed the prayer slightly to ensure that people could distribute the zakat al-fitra, citing Sahih al-Bukhari hadith 957, because Muhammad delayed it to distribute the zakat, whereas the Shafi and the Maliki are saying that you perform the Eid prayer when the sun is fully risen and at its highest brightness, to allow the optimal amount of participation and preparation. And they're also appealing to the Prophet. So they're coming out with two different reelings, but they're appealing to the same source authority. Can you pray with your shoes on or not? Well, the Hanbali school says that it is permissible to pray with your shoes on, provided that they're clean. And the reason for that is because they're looking at hadiths like Sunan Abi Dawud, hadith 652, pray with your sandals, for the Jews do not pray with their sandals or their shoes. Whereas the Shafi and the Maliki view is that it's permissible in principle, but it should be discouraged in mosques or places where cleanliness might be compromised. So it's kind of like it's permissible, but we don't really want you to do it. And it's only permissible if where you're doing it means that your cleanliness, your wudu might be compromised. And the importance, the importance of the mosque is highlighted there. Whereas the Hanafi generally discourage people from praying with their shoes on, except in really specific circumstances. And so you've got these different different opinions, different levels of severity about how much they're willing to tolerate praying with your shoes on in the different schools. Now, the reason for these differences is because they're using that, you've got the influence of regional practices are entering into the madhabs at the time of their formation. They've got different views of reasoning and how you reason from the sources. The Shafi jurists prefer like a much closer textual use of the sources, and they prefer to minimize subjective reasoning. They have different emphasis on hadith authorities. They disagree about which hadiths and what are the rankings of the hadiths, and how these should be incorporated into the mix of formulating Islamic jurisprudence. And so you've got difference. You've got in a religion that's supposed to be perfect, in which everything is clear, and in which everything is laid out for us, and in everything that the limits have all been laid out. You've got different conclusions, but it also goes into bigger things as well. So, like abortion, for example. Again, in this perfected religion in which everything is clear, you would think that the question of when you could kill someone would be something that is laid out clearly, would you not? I mean, it's a serious issue, right? We're not just talking about eating lobster here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a serious,
we're talking about.
Yeah, definitely. You're taking a life.
Well, I mean,
so
yeah. I mean, these other examples that I've given you are a bit more lighthearted, but we're talking about whether to take when you could possibly take someone's life. Now, the Hanafi school says that it's permissible within 120 days, which is the point of ensoulment, if there's a valid reason, such as something that might affect the mother's health, right? But the Maliki school actually virtually prohibits it at all stages, except when the mother's life is in danger. So the Hanafi school is much more lax up to the first 120 days. And then after the first 120 days says that there's got to be a valid reason. Whereas the Maliki school is pretty much against it at all stages, with the exception of certain circumstances, such as when the mother's life is in danger. But in the Shafi school, they disagree about when ensoulment occurs. Some argue it's around 40, some 120. And so depending on which Shafi scholar you're speaking to, you can have an abortion up to the first 40 or first 120 days for a valid reason. But that might include things like extreme hardship, as a valid reason for an abortion. Incidentally, lots of Muslim schools of thought think that it's okay to have an abortion for conditions that don't actually threaten the mother's health, but just mean that you end up being born with a child that's disabled, which I think is horrific. The Hanbali school says that it's permissible up to the point of ensoulment. But again, they disagree when ensoulment occurs. Some scholars say 40, some scholars say 120. And again, they talk about, what are the reasons, and they include that within those reasons, things like fetal abnormalities, even ones that are not threatening to the life of either the child or the mother. So you've got different conditions being given as to when an abortion can be carried out, and different times up to when an abortion can be carried out. But the point is, for me, one of the big points from this is that Islam is pro-abortion. There's no school that says that it's forbidden. There's no school that says that it's haram. And that it's more about when and under what conditions you can have an abortion, not whether you can have an abortion. But the fact that when it comes to taking a baby's life, they don't agree as to when, and they don't agree as to what conditions justify it, for me, is demonstrable proof that the claim that the Quran states what is halal and what is haram was perfected upon this day is just not true. Is just not true. Now, so you've got you've got the issue around abortion, but you've also got the issue around apostasy as well. So again, this is about taking another person's life. So this is kind of a big deal. We're not talking about something serious, something little here. But Muslim madhabs have different views about apostasy laws and about when they should be applied. So in the Hanafi view, apostasy is a serious offence. It's treated as a civil. It's treated as a civil matter unless the apostate apparently becomes some kind of public threat to Islam, and it results in a capital punishment. But the Hanafi school will say that a female apostate could be imprisoned forever until she repents. So kind of like a life sentence or until repentance. So the Maliki school, for instance, says that it's a great crime and it deserves an immediate capital punishment for both men and women. Whereas in the Hanafi school, there's a bit of a delay. It's kind of like, okay, you might have become an apostate, but you're not going around blabbing about it. You're not attacking or criticizing Islam. So if you don't talk, we won't notice. And lots of Muslims, because they know, lots of Muslims know lots of Muslims who've left Islam. Lots of Muslims actually adopt that attitude. The Shafi view is that, apostasy again is punishable by death for both men and women, but there's a 3-day grace period to give an opportunity for repentance. So you don't just carry it out on the day of sentencing. You sentence, and the punishment is carried out 3 days later to try and give the person some time to reflect upon the idea: do they really want to die for this? And so it's a different kind of view. Whereas the stricter schools say you're sentenced and then you're executed. The Hanbali view is that it's punishable by death for both men and women, and you pretty much just carry it out as soon as the person's been found guilty, and the sentence is carried forward. And so what you've got differences about the punishment of apostasy. Not that apostasy punishment should exist, but the timing. And do we have a difference for genders? Do we approach female apostates different from male apostates? Which, if you think about the idea of male guardians over women in Islam, the idea of guardianship, it's kind of like, well, why isn't the father being punished? That's my question, not a question within Islamic fiqh. But it's a question that I would ask to Islamic fiqh. It's like, you come up with this idea of guardianship. Why isn't the man being punished for his daughter being apostate? But this idea that some women could be thrown in prison rather than executed until they repent. And so you've got these differences within something that's supposed to be perfect and clear, which it isn't. Do you want me to give more examples? Shall I keep going, or do you want to stop now?
No, keep going. That's fine. This is great. Loving it.
Right. Okay. Bear with us then. So let me move on to, because I've got other examples. I've got examples about the development of hadith. But I think I want to maybe land on, and then we could also talk about the development of science of hadith, which all comes later. but I want to just maybe give some, because Christians, we tend to think more theologically. That's where our mind goes naturally. So I want to give some theological developments and then maybe give it over for a bit of conversation afterwards. So Islamic theology about Allah, is one of the areas that so clearly develops after Muhammad, that it's the easiest point, I think, in some ways, to show the development, because you take the concept of the divine attributes, the sifat of Allah. You've got the fact that the Qur'an that mentions various attributes, the fact that he's merciful, omnipotent, omniscient, the fact that he's got hands, the fact that he's got a leg and a foot and a face and so on. But then after Muhammad's death, because Muhammad really wasn't a theologian and he didn't really give any theology, after Muhammad's death, there erupted debates within the Islamic world about how to interpret these attributes and their relationship to the essence as part of the development of Sunni orthodoxy. And so you've got, from that development, from those debates, you end up with the development of groups like the Ash'arites, who maintain that God's attributes, like his knowledge and his power, are eternal and distinct, but yet not inseparable from his essence. And a lot of Islamic theological development emerges when the Muslims encounter their heretics. And their heretics were actually rationalists called the Mutasilites, who were arguing that the eternal qualities to God compromised the idea of his divine unity, his tawhid. And so in these debates, you end up with Islamic theology developing after Muhammad by people like al-Ash'ari, who wrote in 936 AD in the Maqalat al-Islamiyin, where he kind of codifies to some degree works that then take on an influence over Islamic theology. Ibn Taymiyyah later defends literal understandings of these texts in the Quran, again rejecting excessive rationalizations and just being more literalist, more textual in his understanding. So, for instance, the doctrine of the Ruyat Allah, or like what we would maybe call the beatific vision, something equivalent there too. In the Quran, in Surah 75, 22 to 23, it references faces that day will be radiant, looking towards their Lord. Something that I've debated with Muslims before, because they try to say that Allah cannot enter his creation. But obviously, if you're looking towards your Lord, then you've entered into vision, and vision is something that Allah has created. Vision is a created thing. And so by being able to see Allah, Allah has entered into his creation, he's entered into vision. And the interpretation of the interpretation of that was something that was theologically contentious amongst Muslims. And so you had debates between Ash'arites and Maturidites that ended up formalizing and crystallizing this idea that it was possible for Muslim believers to see God in the afterlife, not through physical sight, but in a manner befitting to God's transcendence. So they create some other version of it. Now, this kind of theological development is not in the text. It's developing after the text. It's post-Quran. It's post-Muhammad. so the understanding of the text of the Quran is developing after Muhammad, and it's not rooted in Muhammad's own words or Muhammad's own thoughts, because if you did think about it, if you assume that the hadiths were true, and if you trust the hadiths, then you would go to things like Sahih al-Bukhari hadith 7434, which says, you will see your Lord as you see the full moon. Well, that implies that it's through a physical vision, because that is how I see the full moon, as a physical vision. But Muslims massage these texts to mean like, oh, we don't know how, but we won't answer the question how, but we'll just affirm it. Now the Mutasilites, by contrast, denied it when they were arguing with the Asharites and the Maturidites. They denied this. They argued that seeing God implied some kind of spatial limitation and incompatibility with his divine transcendence. And so you have this internal debate within Islam about whether you will see God. And that internal debate crystallizes and starts to create Islamic kalam or Islamic theology. And then you get people like Al-Ghazali, who in the 12th century, he tries to synthesize Asharite theology with more mystical elements in his Ihya Ulum al-Din. And so you've got these developments. These are the equivalents of, great theologians within the church. And I think it'd be important, maybe, I'll come back to that. I want to give some more examples, and then I'll land on my sort of final point. So another example of this would be whether the Quran is created or uncreated. So, you've got, what's his name now? Down at the corner, there's a guy called Abbas, who I've debated a number of times, and he argues that the Quran is created. No, not Ibn Abbas. Maybe Ibn Abbas, I don't know. But Abbas, he comes down to Speaker's Corner, and he tries to debate, and he's debated me a couple of times, and he argues that the Quran is created, not that it is uncreated. But official Sunni doctrine is that the Quran is uncreated. And this again is connected to the Mutasilites, because you had the Mutasilites ended up, as it were, sort of capturing the caliphate, and when and so when that was opposed by people like Ahmad ibn Hanbal around 855, who opposed the Mutasilites. And so when the caliph, I think I'm just questioning some of my notes here as to whether the history is slightly out. So I think, okay. So when Caliph al-Mahmun in 813 to 833 launched an inquisition, he solidified the position of the idea of the Quran as uncreated, and he destroyed the grip of the Mutasilites. Though I'm going to put a question mark there, because as I'm reading it, something in my head's firing, saying that I might have got my history a little bit mixed up there. But there was a solidification of the doctrine of an uncreated Quran around this time. And you find Ahmad ibn Hanbal's theological stance in the Musnad Ahmed, and it's later summarized by Ibn Taymiyyah. And so that doesn't become crystallized as Islamic orthodoxy until the controversy with the Mutasilites. Another example would be the doctrine of free will and predestination. And the reason for this kind of argument is because you've got kind of contradictory statements in the Quran, which, if you read them at a prima facie level, would point to some kind of contradiction, just as you can see the same things in the Bible if you approach that in a simplistic way as well. So in 76:3 it says, we showed him the way whether he be grateful or ungrateful, which kind of implies that you've got a choice. But then you've got Surah 54:49, which says, indeed all things we created with predestination, which very clearly talks about the idea of predeterminism. And so Sunni orthodoxy, particularly again through the influence of Asharite theology, which is mainstream Islamic theology, though you wouldn't know that from debating at Speaker's Corner, because a tiny minority dominate at Speaker's Corner called the Salafi. But the Asharite theology is actually mainstream Islamic theology. And it asserts a kind of middle position that God creates all actions, but humans acquire them through, God creates the actions, but then humans, as it were, acquire them as almost like they're being passed into them. And thus they maintain a responsibility for their faults. And the reason for this was because the Mu'tazilites were arguing that if everything is predetermined and predestined, then how is God just? Where, if people don't have free will, how is God just for holding them for their accounts? And also the fact that in the Qur'an, if the Qur'an is eternal, then the Qur'an is talking about people doing stuff. So were they always predetermined to do those things that even Allah then condemns them for? And so that was the kind of Mu'tazilite argument for both the fact that the Qur'an shouldn't be eternal and for the fact that human beings should be seen to have free will. And so you had this kind of development. But again, it's all after Muhammad. None of this theology comes from Muhammad. It is all based upon how people later interpreted the text of the Quran and the text of the Hadith. I could go on, but I just want to close by pointing out that as a religious studies student, I can tell you that every religion, every single religion develops. It develops in time from the time of its foundings to the time of its present. And so, that's one of the reasons why I find Mormonism absolutely fascinating, because you can see its development in real time, in a documented way that's so much more than any of the ancient religions. And it's also true of Christianity. There was development within the Christian faith. But within the Christian faith, we have this passage. Bear with us for 1 second. So I'm going to read from John chapter 16. I'm going to read from verse 7. Nevertheless, I am telling you the truth, that it is for your benefit that I go away, because if I do not go away, the counselor will not come to you. If I go, I will send him to you. When he comes, he will convict the world about sin, righteousness, and judgment. About sin, because they do not believe in me, and about righteousness, because I am going to the Father, and you will no longer see me. And about judgment, because the ruler of this world has been judged. I have still many things to tell you, but you cannot bear them now. When the Spirit of truth comes, he will guide you into all truth. For he will not speak on his own, but he will speak whatever he hears. He will also declare to you what is to come. He will glorify me, because he will take from what is mine and declare it to you. Everything the Father has is mine. That is why I told you that he takes from what is mine and will declare it to you. So as Christians, now Muslims like to think that that's Muhammad, and there's a whole series of refutations as to why this is not Muhammad. But the point that I want to make is that you see similar historical development within the Christian faith, right? This isn't an argument that this has happened in the Islamic world, it hasn't happened in the Christian world. No, this is an argument that the Quran says Islam is perfected in the lifetime of Muhammad, but the evidence shows clear development of Islam that is now integral to what Islam is today, that comes after Muhammad. And so it wasn't perfected at the time of Muhammad. Christianity has also developed as well. But the Christian faith teaches that the Spirit of God comes to his church, and through the lives of the saints and those that are attuned to the Spirit of God and walking with the Spirit of God, and the movements that they start and the institutions that they found and the teachings that they give, these saints guide the church. And the church is guided by the movements and the institutions and the writings of the saints down through the centuries, many of whom are the church fathers, people like C.S. Lewis and other great teachers today. And so you see this continuous guidance of the spirit of the Christian faith as it develops historically. And that's incorporated into the doctrines of the Christian faith. We expect to see historical developments. We expect to see things like the Council of Nicaea, like the Council of Jerusalem, like the Council of Ephesus, like the writings of the church fathers, and so on and so forth. But in Islam, the texts and the doctrine that arises from the text does not justify the historical developments in terms of the practice of Sharia, in terms of the development of the sources, in terms of the development of the interpretation of the sources, in terms of the development of the theology, that all are evidenced as approaching late, as developing later. And that demonstrates a collapse of the internal coherence and the internal consistency of the Islamic position. Thank you for your patience. I've killed you now, haven't I, just by talking to you?
No, it's fine. No, it's good. It's all good stuff. I mean, like when you, if I have a guest on and they're on a roll, I don't like to sort of interrupt, because I know that whenever someone does that to me, it sort of throws me for six. But no, that's a really good presentation, Bob. Thank you for bringing that to us today. And we've got a few Muslim people watching, which is great to have you here. And I think the one thing I'd like to ask is, given everything that we know about Islam and the contradictions, both internal and external, if you could categorize sort of like internal as sort of like Qur'an and Hadith, and then you have, external as sort of like the history and things like that. What's your main sort of like, what's the thing that sticks out the most for you in terms of the biggest blatant contradiction?
I think, I don't think that Islam collapses on the basis of singular contradictions. We've certainly seen the Dawagandists moving backwards. For decades, you've had Dawagandists pushing the idea of the scientific miracles of the Quran. And quite recently, you've got Ali Dawah coming forward and saying that the whole scientific miracle line of argument has been debunked, that it doesn't work, even though he himself became a Muslim because of that very fallacious logic. He made what he should have done as an intelligent person is reassessed whether he actually set his life off in the wrong direction because of that. So I don't think that there's one. There's many. Some have more foundational impact than others, but I think it's the ones that strike at the heart of the Islamic narrative that are the biggest. So, so for instance, like, Muslims saying that the Quran is one, that there's only one Quran. Well, that's been destroyed by Hatun Tash and Dr. J. Smith. And that's moved the debate forward. Muslims are no longer saying that there's one Quran. They're saying that there's multiple Qurans that are one. But obviously you can have 7 that's 1 and 1 that's 7, but you just can't have 3 that's 1 and 1 that's 3. Other kind of arguments that at the heart of it is the claims that the Quran makes for itself, the idea that it's inimitable, the idea that it's free from contradiction, and the idea that it's been preserved. So when you find contradictions within the Quran, well, that's one of the tests of the Quran itself. So if the Quran fails that, then that's quite a big deal. And as we've already seen, the Quran fails scientifically, the Quran fails historically, and the Quran fails internally as well. It's got contradictions even within its own internal narrative. And so, but the thing is, people aren't going to be persuaded by a singular argument. It's about a series of arguments, and it's also about a clear presentation of an alternative.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair enough. I think a lot of, and this is something that I think is again, it is changing now when you have such big voices within the Islamic world coming out against that narrative of the Quran has been perfectly preserved. Very big names, even scholars and intellectuals are now coming out and saying, history is history. The Quran has not been perfectly preserved. It's a big deal, and I think ultimately, it's under the scrutiny of the West and the Western way of thinking that Islam, I don't think doesn't hold the mustard. Doesn't cut the mustard, rather. Comparatively with Christianity, which has been through the Western rigmarole and the Western way of thinking many a time, and has come up trumps every single time, both historically, archaeologically, and internally as well. But I think it would be good to give some good news to our Islamic, our Muslim viewers that you would be welcomed in with open arms into Christianity. There is a God out there who loves you, who cares for you, who wants to have a deep and intimate personal relationship with you, and gave himself on the cross. Now, when it talks in the Quran about Jesus not being crucified, again, that is an external contradiction in and of itself, because historically we know for sure that Christ was crucified. So either Allah allowed a lie if you like to say that Jesus was a Muslim, if Allah stated clearly that it wasn't Jesus on the cross, then he's let his so-called continuation of the Abrahamic faith to carry on under the scope of a lie, or he's a deceiver, or both. There's no sort of way around it.
Yeah, I mean that draws out a point, doesn't it? That all the prophets from Moses to Jesus all experienced a form of worship that was temple-centered, sacrifice-centered, priestly-led. Where there's liturgy and incense and robes of priests and a focus on the temple to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then Muhammad comes along and all that disappears. There's no priesthood. There's no priestly sacrifices. There's no temple worship. There's no temple. There's no, and so the very nature of worship suddenly and abruptly changes between Islam and the Judeo-Christian faith. And that in itself is a massive contradiction to the claim that Moses and all the prophets up to Jesus, including Jesus, all practiced the religion of Islam. They all practiced the religion of Muhammad. When actually, when we think about how you identify a religion, that claim is impossible to the evidence. And it's not just literary evidence; it's physical evidence. The idea of the Temple Mount and the temple walls, and the fact that no serious historian would deny temple worship as an elaborate and established part of Judaism and of the temple's existence and its importance and so on. And so, you know, and this is the point, is that multiple claims that Islam makes, like the idea that Jesus wasn't crucified, is just contradicted by the external evidence. Now, the Quran says that if the Quran was from any other than Allah, they, meaning you and me, would find contradictions therein. We would find errors therein, you know. And here we are. That this is what we're doing. This is what we're presenting to people. We're testing is the Quran according to the Quranic test, and the Quran is found to be wanting. And so that leaves the Muslims, particularly the ones who are verbose in the chat, a serious question to consider, is that it only needs one of these contradictions to be true for the Quran not to be perfect. You know, that's a very high bar to defend. And if you look at them reasonably, that bar has been failed multiple times through multiple debates, presentations, you know, and demonstrations. And so Muslims, you know, the exit door is shining for you. It is time to leave. And the Christian faith doesn't make such claims. It doesn't make claims about we need a perfect book, you know, we need a book that's inimitable, lacking in any discrepancy. The book is, you know, has to be perfectly preserved. None of those are the basis of the Christian faith. The basis of the Christian faith is the resurrection of Jesus Christ, upon which all of our other beliefs are built. You know, you've got to knock out the resurrection to knock out Christianity. Whereas for Christians, we knock out the Quran and Islam collapses. You know, or because classical Islam develops later than Muhammad, if we knock out the hadiths, Islam collapses. You know, and so this argument today is to show that the Quran makes a claim that is demonstrably false. I did catch wind of one comment from a Muslim in the chat who said, no Muslim claims that the Quran teaches everything. Well, firstly, there is no Quranic justification for hadiths at all. And actually, the evidence of the Quran would seem to point in the other direction. I didn't talk about the hadith development because I could see I was running out of time. But secondly, my argument isn't dependent upon that. My argument isn't dependent upon this idea of the claim that the Quran teaches everything. My argument is dependent upon the claim that the Quran says that on a particular day of Muhammad's life, which most Muslim scholars put as 10 after Hijrah, Allah states that Islam is perfected on that day, which would imply no more revelations of the Quran, which would imply that all of the Sharia is in place, that would imply that all of the necessary authorities are in place, that would imply that all the necessary interpretations of the authorities are in place, that would imply that all the necessary institutions for the necessary interpretations of the necessary authorities are in place, and that the theology is in place. And yet the historical evidence shows that all of those things came after Muhammad's death. And so, since you can't add to perfection, and clearly Islam developed, it was added to and taken away from, then it wasn't perfect. And the Quran is wrong. And so you have a collapse of internal coherence and consistency of teaching.
I just want to sort of share. I just want to share something that a brother in Christ has uploaded onto their YouTube channel, which I think is I've watched it this morning, and I think actually is really good. It's only a minute long. So give me 2 seconds. Here we go. There we go. Here we go. There is only one Quran. So this is a compilation of Islamic scholars who have who are refuting this argument. So it's a little bit comical. So I think it'll be worth a watch.
There's no sound, bro.
Is there no sound?
Yeah, you got to click sound when you're sharing. You got to click share sound. Just to let you know, I've got to go at 4. So
That's
I've got
fine.
10
Yeah,
minutes left.
I got to go at 4 as well.
Right. Okay.
Share screen. Is that coming through now? Can you hear that now?
No, you've got to click on the share sound in the share screen option.
Right, present. Share. Actually, hang on. I can probably just quickly download this. But whilst that's downloading, let's sort of talk about you and your channel, just to sort of give you a bit of a promo as well. So just sort of tell people where we can find you, what sort of work you do, and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So I work as a full-time evangelist here in London. I have a YouTube channel here called Bob of Speaker's Corner. Though lots of people came to know me first as Bob the Builder, which was an accidental nickname that just stuck. You know, and that's the only channel that I'm supported through. I'm not supported through any other channel, though I'm often associated with other channels. Like, you know, I'm not supported through SOCO Films. I'm not supported through Revelation 22. I'm only supported through my own channel. But I work mainly at Speaker's Corner, and then on YouTube doing live streams like this, to try and engage Islam intellectually, and to engage Muslims with polemics and apologetics, to answer their questions and to ask them challenging questions. And I do so because I love Muslims. I want them to become Christian. And I work as a kind of independent evangelist with an ecumenical stance. So I work with all Christians of all denominations. So I teach apologetics to people. I run classes on Zoom on a Monday and a Tuesday that people can attend. I also engage with you know, people outside of the corner, coffees and Zoom calls. People can book in Zoom calls with me on a Thursday if they want to talk. And just, I would like to put out the offer to the Muslims in the chat. If you think that I'm wrong here, if you think that I've misrepresented Islam in some way, as some of you have verbose in the chat that I am, come and talk to me about it. You go to my website, book yourself in for a Zoom call, and let's chat. Because I assure you, I am not misrepresenting your faith. What's happening right now is that your pride is getting in the way of your intellect, and you aren't listening cogently to the argument, or coherently to the argument, or sensitively to the argument, because it is a cogent argument, and it's a coherent argument to the Islamic perspective. Nothing's being distorted, nothing's being misrepresented. It's just that Islam has a giant fat contradiction right in the middle of its own worldview, and I'm showing it to you. And it's one that's evidential because it's based in doctrine versus history. And when you compare doctrine to history, they just haven't panned out in the right way. And there's a number of occasions where that happens in Islam. Like, for instance, in the Qur'an, it says that from the time of Jesus until the day of judgment, the Muslim followers of Jesus will be triumphant over their enemies. Well, that didn't pan out in history, because apparently the Pauline false Christians took over Christianity. Well, according to the Quran, it should have gone the other way, at least until the 7th century, when Muhammad was meant to appear on the scene. But it didn't work out like that. So, you know, Islam on a number of occasions just doesn't connect to history properly. And that's the kind of thing that I do. And if people want to find out more, they can go to my YouTube channel and find other links and other ways to get in touch.
Yep. And I highly recommend to do so. He's a very knowledgeable gentleman. Been doing this for many a year. Certainly helped me out a few times. But yeah, I mean, also as well, you know, I know I said this to you before, but you know, you were one of the reasons that brought me back into the fold of Christianity all those years ago.
Thanks be to God.
You know, you probably get testimonies like that all the time, but you know, it's still, sometimes you don't really understand you know, what a role you're playing into someone's conversion story, that sort of thing. So it's, yeah.
Well,
Right,
I thank God for your conversion, bro, and I thank the Holy Spirit that He's using my meager efforts to reach people. And my inbox suggests that a lot of people are being reached.
Yes.
You know, this is where Christians need to be. We need to be in the public debating arena, which is social media. That's where we Christians need to be evangelizing, because that's where people are going to have their opinions formed and to find out information.
Right, I've got the video clip uploaded. It's 1 minute 23 seconds. We'll play that and then we'll say goodbye and then we'll leave it there. So let's have a look at this.
If I in Arabic, that's the word of God. Arabic is the same in all the Quran. Unlike the Bible, there are 2,000 different versions of the Bible. The original manuscript differs. In Quran, there's only one Quran. But translation can differ.
I can't read.
In other words, if you were to compare two printed Qur'ans, you're going to see differences between them. And this is something that many people are unaware of and many people have heard but are not fully familiar with, especially those who have been exposed to some of our brothers who live in Algeria or Morocco or other North African countries. They recite the Qur'an in a slightly different way. Not just a voice or not just a speaking style, but also changes in letters and words and harakat.
But recently, average Muslims have just simply, without bothering to learn, they have just simply parroted a common way of speaking about the Quran and saying, you know, it's 100% the way it's always been. And they cannot imagine any variation.
And unfortunately, actually, so I have heard some preachers that do say that there's only, you know, one reading or one Quran or something like that. And, you know, if I were to be very generous, I would say that falls under the umbrella of like lies to children, if that makes sense.
Yeah. There you go. I mean, even we didn't even talk about the development of the Qur'an, but the Qur'an is another example of development post-Muhammad. And the theology or the understanding of the Qur'an develops after Muhammad. And that would just be another example of the same thing. This perfect thing wasn't perfect, and it needed to be perfected later on by different generations of Muslims. So yeah, great video to end on.
Yeah. All right then. Well, thank you so much everyone for watching. God bless you all, and we will see you in the next video / live stream. So watch this space. See ya.